Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Beyond Focus TV. My name is Angie Daniel. I am the hostess of the show. On tonight's show, we have with us Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, who is going to talk to us about the big debate that we've been having about gun control. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, I'll introduce her to you. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Beyond Focus TV. We are here with Ms. Clarke. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Angie. It's great being back with you.
I know. Well, one of the things that I really wanted to talk to you about, because I know it's part of your panel, is gun control.
Yes.
So we have so much that I want to cover. I want to just start with the basic. We are in the process of making laws, changing things. What's your opinion first and foremost, and why do you believe that the idea of gun control is it's such a topic that we need to really push right now?
Well, clearly the recent horrific incident in Newtown, Connecticut has crystallized for everyone just how bad things have gotten in our civil society when it comes to the use of guns. To see 20 innocent children cut down, and in the most intimate of settings, their schools, has really awakened the nation, quite frankly, to something that we've been suffering with in urban environments for quite some time, and that is just the unregulated flow and availability of guns in our civil society and the toll that it is taking on the American people. So, with that as a backdrop, unfortunately, we've hit one of those eureka moments in civil society where everyone says, wait a minute.
Something got to be done.
Something has got to be done. It has to be meaningful, and it has to attack the problem of gun violence in all of its manifestations, which is I think a very important point to make. I have decided that I would work very closely as part of the Leader Pelosi's gun task force in the Democratic caucus to make sure that the type of handgun violence that our communities have been subject to for so long are also part of the debate. Because there's such a wide range of ways in which lives have been devastated by the unregulated use of guns in our civil society, that it's important that every perspective is a part of the debate.
I love the fact that you just mentioned it, because one of the things that everyone is talking about is, making it legal to own a gun. We're not talking about the street gun owners. We're not talking about the drug dealers. We're not talking about like people in the neighborhood that just have guns and the kids. But we're just talking about like the basic who owns guns. We have to do background checking. These are legal stuff. Quick question for you before we get really involved into it. How would you think more gun control laws would have a greater impact in our society?
I think that, first of all, gun control is a loaded term, in that it conjures up different things in different people, depending on where you sit in the gun debate. We're starting with the basic premise of what is embedded in the U.S. Constitution, which is the right to bear arms. In certain parts of the nation, that's a time-honored tradition that, has evolved over time. And, at the time when that was written, it was a new nation. Militias were basically the way that communities governed themselves. The build out of public safety officers and things of that nature had not been matured in the way it is in our civil society today. And so for us to take a literal approach to the right to bear arms, it does not get us to the point where we realize that the rights of gun owners end where the rights to be safe from crazy gun incidents begin with other people. And so when we talk about gun control, it's important that we put it in that context. What we have decided to do in Washington is to really break this loaded term down. And there are a level of different ways of doing that, right? So you can talk about dealing with military-style guns, assault weapons, and all of the equipment that goes with it, whether it's multi-ammunition magazines. You also have to talk about gun violence prevention, right? Which is, how do we get to the root causes of dealing with gun violence?
Let's talk about the preventions first, because that's really interesting, because it's one of the things that we never really talk about. We only talk about the laws, how we control things. So let's talk about the preventions. How can we prevent such heinous crime, like such hideous, the most ridiculous things from happening? How can we prevent that?
Well, part of it is, can we truly prevent gun violence in its entirety? That has to come with a philosophical shift. But there's some things that we can do to sort of abate what is taking place. And it's to do things like make sure that there's a universal background check for anyone who wants to purchase a gun.
So this is just for the purchase?
This is for the purchase. This is for the purchase, because what has happened in places like New York is that you're able to go to other jurisdictions where purchasing guns are much easier. And then in transferring the guns you purchase to someone else, there is no consequence to that. Once the purchase is initially done, a private sale, for instance, is not covered under universal, under the current system of background check. So having a universal background check that drills down into the transference of arms then begins to close those gaping holes that we have become vulnerable to, which is the private sale.
Wait 1 second. I have to take a short break right now, but I'm writing notes down into my prevention, because I think it's extremely important for us to understand that if we can prevent certain things from happening, we can save lives.
That's right.
So we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll continue our prevention, and then we'll get into the whole law department part. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Beyond Focus TV. If you are just turning in, we are here with Congresswoman Yvette Clarke. We are talking about the debate of gun control. Right now, we are just seriously having a great conversation about prevention. So you were telling us how we should, before all the laws, we should talk about prevention first.
Well, there are just some regulatory issues that, quite frankly, the gun manufacturing industry has made it very difficult to address. And one of those is the background check.
Yes.
Because as I was stating before our break, many gun sales are not regulated or registered in any way because they're inheritance of guns, they're private sales of guns, there's the gun show loophole that you oftentimes hear about. If there are all of those openings where someone could possibly, some unlawful person can access a gun, then it creates a ripple effect in the civil society, because that person can then get their hands on a gun, never have to go through a criminal background check, pass that gun on
to the next person,
and so on and so on. And so if you're talking about prevention, one of the ways to do that is to begin to choke off avenues by which people can unlawfully access a gun. And we have to make it the law of the land that there must be a criminal background check, period. From there, you're talking about some other societal issues, right? When you have systemic poverty in certain areas, the access to the gun is much easier than the access to a quality education. You've got a formula for disaster. And for too long, we've neglected impoverished communities. And that is where we found that this issue has become most vexing. It's the access that our young people get for conflict mediation purposes, these weapons of destruction. And so part of the dialogue has to be, even if we take the mental health aspect of it.
I know you're really big on that. Really big.
Exactly. When you talk about communities that are traumatized by handgun violence, what are the reactions to that, and how do we again do some mitigation strategies to deal with the type of trauma that these communities have been subjected to for generations now? And I think that part of the discussion has to be not just about the personnel who would be the law enforcement, but how do we deal with social workers? How do we deal with all of the educators? How do we deal with families that are in distress and need intervention to turn that corner on how we resolve conflict in our communities? That's another issue that I believe is an important part of the dynamic when you're looking at the urban violent environment. And that's what this task force is really taking on. You have members from across the nation who have very similar circumstances to the ones that we faced here in New York. Most notably Chicago. It's like most notably Chicago.
It's January and they already had what, 40,
I think it's like 47 to 48,
right? Death in 1 month.
In 1 month.
Due to
and they can talk about the geographic areas specifically where the bulk of these killings have occurred. So that there's a very broad array of ways in which we have to address the issue of gun control. Some would call it self-control, others would call it a government intervention process that respects the right of the gun owner in the settings where that's most appropriate, but then also respects the right for peace, safety, and security in the communities that have been victimized
by it. There are 3 things I'd like to get your opinion on, because it's one of those that we really need to get the aspect of it, the NRA. Do you think that the NRA and Wayne LaPierre have some responsibility to society?
Well, we have to almost separate Wayne LaPierre from the membership.
Okay.
Because all of the polling data indicates that the average NRA member is not walking in lockstep with the rhetoric that we're hearing from Wayne LaPierre.
Okay.
Then we have to look at, where does the bulk of the funding for the NRA come from?
But it's like, it's not an underground. I mean, it's point blank. It's clear. I believe that his opinion is really strong. Although I've heard the fact that the NRA feels like, like his opinion is his opinion. It's not what we stand for. But he's making this opinion so verbally, so openly, that you can't separate those two.
Well, let's put it this way. I think that the more that he talks, actually, the more we get into a real debate.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, if your answer to Newtown is to, create a new police force that is going to be in every school, then we want to get to, okay, how are we going to fund this? Even if it were a practical solution, how are we going to fund this in an era where, those same interests are saying that we have to cut the federal budget?
I mean, in my opinion, having a police force in every school district or within certain areas, I know what the presence of the police does to me. I know how I feel when I see, because you become very alert, you become very alarmed. You don't feel safe because you're thinking that there's a reason why they are here. So imagine, I'll use my daughter, for example. I have a 10-year-old that she's going to go to school every day. And what she's noticing is the police department within her school. How does that affect the child's mentality?
Well, I mean, I think you have the answer to that. What he has said has really shone a light on the lack of enlightenment.
Yes.
That he is a representative of all of these gun owners across the nation is espousing. And everything in terms of polling data indicates that people think that he's really off track with this. So we got to separate, quite frankly, Wayne LaPierre and then say, well, is he really a spokesperson for the vast majority of Americans at this stage?
Yes.
Because not only are his own members saying it's time for a universal background check, but all the other Americans who may not be members of the NRA, who may or may not be gun owners, are saying it's time for universal background checks.
Yes.
That to me says a vast majority of Americans recognize what time it is, and notwithstanding his rhetoric, we are obligated as lawmakers to make it so.
Okay, good. We're going to take a short break because I'm actually taking a break right now. And we need to continue this great conversation because I think the community at large, and then, like we are in inner city, we need to really talk about like how this gun control law will affect us on a daily basis. So we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Beyond Focus TV. We are here with Congresswoman Yvette Clarke. We are talking about the laws of gun control, the whole NRA situations, and Mr. LaPierre's opinion on what needs to be done. There's this whole debate about, there is what we call the banning of high-capacity magazines. I know personally I don't know what that is. So.
Okay. So assault weapons were created to kill as many people as quickly as possible in the theater of war. These same weapons, though somewhat modified, are now made available to the general public. Hence the type of killing we see in Aurora,
Yes.
we see in Newtown, and we've seen in Columbine.
Yes.
You hear about this Bushmaster. This is a weapon that was engineered to kill as many people as quickly as possible. High capacity magazines can get, shoot off upwards of 100 rounds in less than, 2 minutes.
Whoa.
And so when you hear about the families from Newtown and the children
Yes.
and the condition in which they were found at the end of this really horrific incident, you had, 6-year-olds with upwards of
Yes.
11
bullets
bullets in their body, and only a high-capacity magazine enables you to do that. Now, why is that? We know why that's a problem.
Yes.
This is a military-grade weapon
That
now
shouldn't
being
be.
used in civil society, but it's a danger to the people, to the general public. It's a danger to law enforcement. Oftentimes, law enforcement are outgunned by these high-capacity magazines. So the whole debate about not just banning it, but bringing more law enforcement to bear does not even protect them from a circumstance where someone is using a high-capacity magazine on a semi-automatic rifle weapon, military-grade assault weapon. So we've got to be clear that this is not something that needs to be in our civil society.
Yes.
And that, initially, we're talking about sportsmen, hunters. There is no context in which an assault weapon is needed outside of the military theater.
Okay. So what can we do right now, as besides saying that, we want this to be done, we need gun control laws to go in effect? What can we do as a society to change this?
Yeah, I think that everyone has to play their role and their part, and I think that for communities like those in New York City, in central Brooklyn, in my district in particular, that have seen more than its share of heartache and just devastation from unfettered handgun use in many communities, we need to make sure that our faith and our desires are a part of the debate.
Yes.
We can't be marginalized by people thinking that, okay, if we just ban assault weapons, that will be the end all to be all. We know that gun trafficking is really a major part of this as well. And if we don't address that as part of our gun violence prevention strategy, let me back up a minute. Many people don't even know there is no one federal law right now that prohibits gun trafficking. And I mean, that blew me away when I just assumed that there was a federal law that prohibited it. But what has happened is that people have made this such a complex issue that it's a problem with commerce, it's a problem with, law enforcement, and they have no way of prosecuting when you have these private sales that I started this conversation with, and there's nothing that prohibits that.
Okay. Couldn't we start with not, it would be illegal to have a show gun? Couldn't we start with that?
Well, if you register people, if you do a background check, not necessarily even register, if you do a background check on the individual who is purchasing, and you have their information, you can trace those particular weapons. In the same way that we can trace a car to that individual, then they have much more of a responsibility and liability should that weapon end up in the hands of someone else without them going through a background check and using it in a crime.
I like the liability part.
Oh, because right now there is no liability.
Yeah. There's no liability as to what happens to the gun that you sold to so-and-so, because it's like a car.
That's right.
If
there's a transfer.
Yes.
Should be a transfer of title.
Yes. And if we can do that, as part of what we need to do, I don't like the word control, because there's no such thing as
I think
control.
what it should be called is responsible gun ownership.
Yeah.
Because if you intend to do right by the society and you have all good intentions in the purchasing of your weaponry, you know how to lock them up so that people don't have access to them. Your children are safe in the household. All of that is part of the responsibility of owning a gun. Then this should not be a problem.
Okay. Well, you know, you and I, whenever we have a conversation, we always run out of time.
Oh.
So we just ran out of time. I wanted to hear your last words to the community in terms of what we can do to make this a transition that we are part of, because it's really important for us to know, don't just sit around and wait for somebody else to fight your fight, because this is our fight. This is our community fight. This is our children's fight.
Yes.
This is our everyday.
Our future's fight.
Our future's fight. So let's be part of that. What would you say to the community?
I would say that, you know, this is a moment where we can all make a difference. And it can be a transformational moment or it can be a regressive moment.
Yes.
I think that this window of opportunity where you have the President of the United States
involved,
who has been a leader on this issue, and so many have come out.
our mayor.
Our
Like,
mayor.
oh my God,
I
is there a
mean,
mayor
you know,
against gun control?
That's right.
Yeah.
We've got, you know, a transformational moment here, and we will be able to look back at this and say we did a good thing. Then it's important to be involved, that we transform the way that our children and their grandchildren will live side by side, whether our children are gun owners, legal gun owners, or not.
Yeah.
But that there's a new level of respect for life and a respect for responsible gun ownership.
Well, thank you, ma'am. Thank you for coming and sharing with us. You know, we had to do a third part to this because we have so much to talk about. This has been one of probably my favorite show, definitely one of my favorite guests. I hope you enjoy the moment and you've learned something from this and take it to the next level. If anything, you could always get in touch with us, or you can go into Congresswoman Yvette Clarke's website, and then we'll have this conversation continuously. Have a great night. We'll see you next Tuesday, same place, same time. Bye-bye.
Écoute-moi ça.